So for all of those who are participating with us, I thank you also. And feel free to share your thoughts, your insights, your reaction to this unique brand of Judaism. It has different names. One name that we came up with is inspirational, meaning that we can be inspired by understanding the world around us. We don't have to make up things to be spiritually uplifted. The world itself is so wondrous and so awesome and so amazing, with so many marvels to behold, that we are inspired by how the world actually is. It's also referred to as cosmic Judaism because the greatest Jew who ever lived, perhaps, the greatest intellect, a great humanitarian, was Albert Einstein. And he said, the religion of the future will be a cosmic religion. By that he meant, it will not be tribal. It will not say, God loves us and he hates you. We're going to heaven and you guys are going to another place. No, he envisioned a creative force that engendered everything. In fact, he said that our goal should be to enlarge the circle of affection and affinity, to incorporate and encompass all living things. So it's the antithesis of a tribal religion. Judaism began as tribal. We thought God was the God of the Jewish people. But then as Jews developed and evolved through the prophets, God, this creative power, was seen to rule over everything and to love all creatures. We no longer, in cosmic Judaism, perceive God as a person or anthropomorphic entity, but rather a creative power that's wondrous and unites all, transcends all, and is within all. And so that's what we attempt to convey here. And I hope that you also spread the message, become evangelists, to let other people know that religion doesn't have to insult your intelligence and can be rational and inspiring all at once. This passage that we're going to look at is extraordinary, especially when viewed through a rational lens. It has much to offer, many different messages at the same time, that I will briefly share with you. And if you can catch our Shabbat celebration on Friday night, I strongly suggest you do, because we'll be talking about this passage again, and an inspirational message will be shared that is derived from the passage. So what happens in Beha'alotecha, and what does it mean? Well, most people would think Beha'alotecha, that's a very weird word. I've never heard it before. I have no clue what it means. But actually, you do have a clue of what it means, because in Hebrew, the words are based on elements that are added on or aggregated to each other. Most people have probably heard the word aliyah. Aliyah, or in Hebrew aliyah, means to go up to the bima, and it's from the word to go up, to rise. Aliyah means to go up. When you go to Israel, it's called aliyah. Someone who is an immigrant to Israel is called an oleh, someone who's gone up. And someone who leaves Israel, oh my, they're called a yored. That means someone who's gone down. And when they say it's raining, they say geshem yored. Rain is falling down. So oleh, aliyah, means to go to Israel, or it also means to go up to the bima, to ascend. Beha'alotecha is saying when you raise up, and it's talking about the lamps. But when you raise up the lamps, and it's giving you a whole bunch of details about rules and regulations. The passage has many, many little details about certain rules and rights that must be followed. I'm not going to go into those because there's so much else in the passage. Let me share some of them. One is an amazing statement that's made in the Torah, in a story that is totally overlooked by so many people, especially the traditionalists, the Orthodox, and those who condemn intermarriage. Let me explain what happens. Miriam and Aaron, the siblings of Moses, get into an argument with Moses. They're upset with him. And because they're upset, they decide to throw in something totally out of left field that has nothing to do with what they're talking about. And they say, by the way, you married a Cushite woman. Oh no, what's a Cushite woman? Biblical scholars don't know exactly where Cush is, but it's very good speculation that it's Ethiopia or the Sudan. It's somewhere in North Africa. Why do they think that? Well, Cush was a descendant of Noah through Ham, a descendant of Noah. By the way, we know that's how Noah didn't keep kosher. He named his son Ham, but he had a son named Ham. And then one of Ham's descendants was Cush, and he was located in North Africa. Now, sadly, Noah's son Ham is accused of a crime of seeing his father's nakedness, which was done inadvertently. But because of that, they said, you now will be punished. You, Ham, will be the slave to your brothers. And from that, the people in the Bible Belt, the whites in the United States said, wow, see that? The people of North Africa and the African nations, they were meant to be slaves to the whites. It's in the Bible. And sadly, they used the Bible to justify slavery, much as the Bible is used to justify discrimination against women. That's why in cosmic Judaism, we not only believe in a power that transcends any one group or any one species, we also believe in a concept that liberates ourselves from believing that every word of the Torah is true and rather sees the Torah as the first step towards morality. Therefore, the misogyny, the stories about women being subservient, are not explained away. They're just disregarded as a byproduct of a bygone era. And so we no longer are chained to the past in that way. But in this story, Miriam and Aaron say to Moses, and you married a Cushite woman. What does that mean? He married outside of the faith. He was intermarried. By the way, my friends, if someone ever says, you're violating the laws of Moses because you intermarried, you should say quite to the contrary. Moses intermarried. So I'm confirming the laws of Moses. You, my friend, if you criticize intermarriage, you are violating the laws of Moses. Also, she was dark-skinned. And so the Bible has a very interesting comeback to Moses' attackers. Miriam, when she levels this accusation against Moses, you married a Cushite, a dark-skinned woman, instantly she's stricken with leprosy. Leprosy, it's as if God has a sense of humor and says, oh, you like white? I'll show you white. And she turns white and she totally freaks out and she begs to be forgiven. And Moses, to his credit, doesn't say, well, you attacked me, I'm not going to help you. He forgets about it. He was selfless and he says a prayer to God, a very, very short prayer, one word, Rafuana, cure her, please. And God says to Moses, I can't do that right away. She committed a sin. I can't just erase it like it never happened. I'll make her estranged from the camp. She'll be exiled from the camp for 7 days. And then I will follow through on your request and I will cure her. Interestingly, Aaron, who made the same accusation as Miriam, isn't punished at all. We don't really know why. You could say, well, maybe the Bible's discriminating again, saying, well, he's a man, so he's not punished, and she's a woman. But just a few passages before, the two sons of Aaron, for delivering strange fire, are executed on the spot, burned to a crisp. So probably that's not it, but the Bible doesn't really explain why that happened. So this passage speaks to us today and says, we don't necessarily as Jews recommend intermarriage, but neither should we prohibit it or shun it or treat people who intermarried as if they're somehow less Jewish. If the greatest Jew who ever lived intermarried, and if accusers were punished, that teaches us something about acceptance. People who convert to Judaism are the most Jewish of all, because unlike those who were born into it and had no choice, they made a conscious choice to embrace Judaism and oftentimes studied and learned and went through some type of procedure to become Jewish. That's a very important story in this passage, but it's not the only one. There's another one that's very significant, and that is that God explains in this passage the role of the Levites, the assistant priests. What happens to the Levites? They are made to be God's priests on earth. They are to carry out the functions of the holy tabernacle and to be God's intermediary. And why were they chosen? Well, this is what God says. When you were in Egypt, I struck down dead the firstborn of all Egypt, the Egyptians, and even their cattle and their animals. But I spared you, the Jewish people. You were not stricken, and the firstborn was not taken. Now, some of you might be from my era. Maybe you used to watch Bewitched. Maybe you used to watch I Dream of Jeannie. But in Bewitched, if they cast a spell on someone, they couldn't get rid of the spell. It was like, I cast it, I can't take it back. So they had to like cast another one or alter it in some way so that it wasn't quite so harsh because they didn't have the power to take it back. So here, God strikes down the firstborn. So it's kind of like with the Jews, well, I did it for everybody. I can't take it back. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the Levites as my people. They're going to be mine to do with as I wish. Instead of killing the firstborn, they're going to be the firstborn. And instead of killing them, I will make them my people. I own them. They are now my property, and they're going to serve me as my priests. Now, obviously, this is considered actually to be elevated to a very high status, but the priests are then the firstborn. The rest of the people, when you have a firstborn, you must pay money to God in order to redeem the firstborn so they're not stricken. That's a ceremony called Pidyon Haben, which means the redemption of the firstborn. And it's still done today in some circles where they give some coins in a ritual, often at a wedding, to redeem the firstborn and so, to celebrate this ancient tradition. So that's another thing in this passage that's very interesting. However, both of these, as significant as they are, pale in comparison to another story that takes place in this passage if you are vegetarian or vegan or champion those beliefs. And what is that? That is when the Jewish people, you have to picture this now. Imagine this is actually going on. And again, in cosmic Judaism, we take this as a story like Aesop's fables that teach lessons. But imagine this. The Jewish people are now liberated. They're in the desert, and there's over 1 million people. How would they possibly feed themselves for 40 years in the desert? A miracle happens, according to the Torah. God sends the manna from heaven. It's food that literally drops down like the dew and has a wonderful taste and sustains them. That is miraculous enough. But now we're also asked to believe that the Jewish people weren't satisfied with that. They complained bitterly to Moses. This manna, we're tired of it. It's the same thing every day. We want meat. We want something that's going to fill our stomachs. We liked it better back in Egypt, where we had all the free food and room and board and 100% employment. We were better off there, and they're complaining bitterly. And Moses, in another rather humorous episode, says to God, God, why are you doing this to me? These aren't my children. I didn't bear these people. Why am I responsible for them? Why do I have to put up with all this nonsense? And then he says, strike me dead. I'd rather die than have to put up with this riffraff with these people. And God says, don't worry, take it easy, Moses. I got it under control. I got another miracle up my sleeve. And so what he does is he sends an east wind, and it blows the flock of quail over them. And then as they come over, they all drop dead out of the sky. And the people have plenty of food to eat, all the meat that they can want. In fact, so much that it's coming out of their nostrils. And so he says, okay, you want meat? You got it. Here it is. But then afterwards, God is so incensed and so outraged at the people, not only for being ungrateful to him, but also for being ungrateful to Moses and giving Moses a hard time. It's like, Moses is his protege. And here they are complaining to Moses and making his life difficult. So what does he do? Well, in typical godlike fashion, he strikes them dead, sends plagues after them. They get plague, and they're dropping dead like the quail out of the sky. And then finally Moses said, okay, stop doing this. And Moses prays for them. And then after a while, they're okay. Why is this significant to vegetarians? They say, aha, you see, you want to eat meat. It's a plague. It's going to cause bad health. It's going to harm the planet. It's going to hurt these animals. And so vegetarians love to cite this passage. They have many passages in the Bible that we can cite to support a vegetarian diet, including in the Garden of Eden, where it says that the ideal situation, when we're created in an idyllic environment, we had the plants to eat and we didn't kill animals. And that way we weren't cruel. And when eating animals was introduced, it also came along with cruelty. It's also said that in the end of days, when we're also in paradise, there will be no eating of meat. So there's a lot of good reasons, strong biblical support for a vegetarian diet. Also, some holy people, the Nazarites, they also gave up eating meat. But this passage is by far the best and the strongest one that people like to cite because it's filled with drama and angst and everything else. So this is another amazing story that takes place in the Torah. By the way, at Va-Dor, we have people of all different backgrounds and all different belief systems. Many people join Va-Dor because they believe strongly in this cosmic Judaism concept. Many others, they don't really necessarily ascribe to it. They might ascribe to a traditional view of God, some force or some entity that's out there watching over us and protecting the Jewish people and will help us to live happily ever after in an afterlife. And the same is true with the eating of meat. We have some people in our congregation who are vegetarians and others who are not. But I would say, as a vegetarian and someone who is, as the rabbi of Va-Dor, that if we could try eating less meat and try eating more plant products, it'll be better for the planet and better for us and better for the animals. And I would also strongly suggest that if we believe at all in compassion and rahmanas for all living creatures, we would never, ever eat any meat that comes from a slaughterhouse. These places have been described as Holocaust survivors as an eternal Treblinka. They are really, really horrific and go against the Jewish sensibilities. In Judaism, we have a day of rest for the animals. In Judaism, we say, feed the animals that you have before you feed yourselves. We believe in compassion. They apparently were influenced by outside cultures that had animal sacrifice, so they weren't quite able to liberate themselves from that and imagine that God actually required that, which is obviously preposterous. But it would be better off if we could gradually wean ourselves as people and as a species from the eating of meat. So those are passages from the Torah, but I'm going to tell you one more in this passage. As if that wasn't enough, there's another remarkable story that's often overlooked, and that is that in the wilderness, these two people go running around prophesying, Eldad and Medad. And what are they doing? Well, they're acting as if they're getting messages from God and they're prophesying. And Joshua, who's the second in command, Moses' lieutenant, is outraged. He's incensed at their chutzpah. He goes to Moses and he said, these two upstarts, they're prophesying. They act like they're prophets. They're trying to usurp your position, Moses. What should I do with them? And Moses is rather amused. He says, are you upset on my part? You angry for me? He says, I wish all my people could be prophets. I wish everybody had a pipeline to divine inspiration and love and wisdom. And that just shows the remarkable quality of Moses. Most leaders in that situation would say, off with their head, execute them. But this is an indication of the great heights of morality and humility of Moses, that he's amused that Joshua's all upset. Says, no, this is a good thing. More power to them. So these are the many different stories in this one passage. I do appreciate the time that Sharon provides to get into the passage a little more deeply, because on a Friday night, if I went into this type of detail and described all of these things, most of the people would be out the door after I was halfway through. We do strive to have a Shabbat celebration that's an hour in length. And clearly within that time frame, it's often not enough to give its full due to the Torah reading. And that's why it's helpful to have times like this where we can get into more of the detail about some of the passages. Some of the passages are deadly boring and don't have much to offer. They go on and on and on about the details of how you sacrifice animals, which is really grisly, gruesome, grotesque, and graphic. But this passage and many others are very sublime.